The rain didn't just fall. It moved sideways through the storm drains, funneled by rusted grates and cracked concrete, pounding into the shallow water already flooding the tunnel floor. Shay crouched low in the blackness, one hand resting on the slick edge of the tunnel wall, the other holding steady against the sling of her suppressed submachine gun. The weight of the gear was familiar. So was the stillness. Above them sat the compound, Warehouse 2B, rebel-held, no windows, reinforced steel doors, heat signatures sparse and hard to map. Somewhere inside, according to the last intercepted ping, was an Allied intel officer they were not supposed to leave behind. No drones overhead. No birds inbound. The ceiling above her boots was a full 2 feet thick and soaked through. There would be no air cover, no reinforcement, just the team, and only for as long as the radios held. Her infrared strobe was set but not active. Her gloves were wet and cold. The rebreather filter tucked against her back shifted when she moved too fast, and already her knees were soaked from crawling through the runoff access tunnel that led them under the perimeter. Behind her, less than 2 meters back, another SEAL crouched with the same posture, waiting on her motion. They would split after the breach, but for now, her signal still held command. Her breath was steady. Every inhale sharpened the shape of the situation, instead of softening it. She rolled her shoulder once and reset the grip on her suppressed weapon. Then she reached into her plate carrier and unclipped the IR marker. It blinked once in her hand before she shut it off again. It would be used if they got separated inside, or if someone came looking for a body that needed identification. Hopefully, neither would be necessary. The storm drain above them rattled. A shadow passed. Heavy boots scuffed against metal grating. The rebel patrol was directly overhead. No voice, just movement and the faint creak of wet fabric. Shay's eyes didn't follow him. Her gaze remained fixed forward. She didn't need to see him. She knew his range. The weight of a man who hadn't checked his 6 in 3 months. Not trained, just bored, just armed. Not for long, but she didn't move. Control was discipline, and discipline didn't shoot what it could avoid. He passed. The echo of his boots faded, washed away by the constant slap of rain through the open sluice vents above. Shay signaled back with one hand, 2 fingers lifted, then one. Countdown. Her partner acknowledged with a slight nudge forward, then silence. No verbal confirmations, nothing spoken. Her infrared strobe clicked once on her belt. Not lit, just waiting. She adjusted the sling on her shoulder and flexed her fingers to shake off the stiffness creeping up from the cold. There was no dry left in her uniform. Water clung to the fabric like it was part of the fiber itself, soaked into the seams, pulling heat from skin and breath from ribs. The steel access hatch ahead was marked with old yellow paint and 4 digits half rubbed away by time. It opened up into a crawl space beneath the warehouse floor. Their intel said the floor plate was hollowed out for maintenance on old electrical lines. It was narrow. It would echo, but it was dry. Shay placed one palm flat against the hatch, a slow exhale. She didn't feel calm. She felt accurate, and accuracy had no use for calm. The wet steel moved with one push, hinges creaking as little as they could under her measured pressure. The opening split just enough for them to slide through. Shay led with her weapon, followed by a controlled step forward. No clatter, no stumble. Every movement pressed low, dampened by breath and precision. Her boots found a foothold along the seam of the interior ledge. Inside, the crawl space stretched into blackness. No lights, no motion. The metal was cold against her forearms as she slid in. Behind her, her partner followed, one quiet breath at a time. This wasn't the plan. It was the contingency. The North Catwalk entry team would move first. If all was clear, they would suppress the nearest camera tower and ping the green light across the shared channel. Then Shay's side would move into Warehouse 2B directly from below. But even before her team's window opened, she already felt it in her ribs. The timing was off. The air was too still. The rain too loud. The ground too quiet. The signal wasn't coming. Shay didn't stop. She moved anyway. One hand gesture, 3 fingers again, this time pointed forward. Her partner didn't hesitate. He knew what the silence meant. No one was coming. They were already in. The signal had cut too early, and the mission hadn't even begun. The crawlspace opened into a low-maintenance shaft that fed directly into the sublevel of Warehouse 2B. The moment Shay emerged from the tunnel, her boots touched dry concrete for the first time in nearly an hour. It wasn't much, and it wouldn't last, but it was enough to re-center. She crouched behind a row of stacked pallets wrapped in fogged plastic, watching the way the red safety lights pulsed along the far ceiling. Somewhere above, machinery clicked. Something ran on an automated cycle, unaffected by alarms or rebels or anything that bled. Shay and her partner split formation without a sound. One peeled left to cut off the hallway to the main loading bay. She stayed right, sweeping toward the central floor. She paused behind a tarp-covered crate and let her optics adjust. Her infrared filter flickered through half-clarity. Too much heat bleed in the air, too much steam rising from the cracked ground. Pipes hissed along the wall, dripping condensation into oily puddles that reflected shapes where none stood. A single hostile moved through the open corridor, his rifle slack at his side. He wore a loose jacket that hung past his waist and tracked with the gait of someone with too much time and no sense of urgency. Shay held position. Her muzzle stayed level. The angle was clear, but there was no need to fire unless he saw something he shouldn't. He passed within 6 feet of her position, stepped around a coil of cabling, then turned the corner toward the west side of the building. She moved as soon as his shadow disappeared, slipping along the edge of the wall until she reached the far alcove near the storage lockers. That was where she found him. The hostage sat slumped against the base of an old electrical panel. His wrists were zip-tied behind him, duct tape across his mouth, shoulders soaked and shaking. His head lolled slightly, but he was awake, breathing. One shoe gone. His eyes met hers with no sound. Just the wide awareness of someone who had not expected to be found. Shay knelt beside him, pulled a short blade from her belt, and cut the restraints with 2 quick motions. The ties dropped into a puddle beside his boot. She peeled the tape from his mouth in one measured pull, and when he inhaled sharply, she covered his lips with her gloved hand. "Quiet, nod if you understand." He nodded twice. She removed her hand. "Can you walk?" Another nod, this one slower, uncertain. Shay helped him to his feet. He was lighter than expected, but off balance. One leg wasn't tracking clean. Not broken, but stiff. Maybe blood loss. Maybe worse. She turned, guiding him back toward the access tunnel when the sound cracked through the ceiling like a dropped metal sheet. It wasn't a gunshot. Not yet. It was a shout. One word in a dialect she didn't fully recognize, followed by boots thudding across upper grates. Her partner's voice came low and tight over the radio. "Body's been found. They pulled a manual alarm." Shay looked up. The overhead lights didn't change, but red security strips began flashing faster now, casting moving shadows against the floor. The siren didn't wail. It clicked, a hard mechanical pulse echoing through steel support beams. This wasn't a wireless trigger. No, it was physical. Someone had pulled the alarm by hand. That meant visual confirmation. No, that meant they were seen. The hostage shifted beside her, beginning to breathe harder. She tapped his arm twice. "On me. Stay tight. No voice unless I stop." She led him along a narrow catwalk pressed against the inner wall, moving low behind a forklift with its tires half deflated and a tarp hung across its engine. Above them, figures moved across the gantry. Flashlights clicked on. Not searchlights, just handheld beams dancing without pattern, betraying the fact that they weren't trained to clear their own compound. Shay's partner came back on the comms. "Fallback route might be hot. You'll need to improvise. I'm moving to cover the bay exit." "No," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "They'll collapse on the fallback. They're pulling in." "Copy, then I'll delay." "Negative. Break contact if spotted. Regroup at exfil window Delta." The radio went silent. She moved faster now, adjusting her pace to keep the hostage upright. His foot dragged every third step. She kept him pressed against the wall, angled her body to shield him from view. A shout rang out ahead closer, then another. They were starting to sweep floor by floor. Shay didn't panic. She recalculated. The fallback plan would route them through the same corridor where bodies had now been found. There would be more lights, more eyes, less margin. If the hostage couldn't run, she would have to carry. That would slow her down. That meant staying out of main lines of movement. As they reached the edge of the floor plate, she spotted a narrow service hall angled off the far wall part of the original substructure that hadn't been used in years. She adjusted course immediately, signaling with 2 fingers across her back. The hostage didn't respond, but he followed. Above them, the red lights pulsed harder. Still no siren. Silence had protected them. Now it was betraying them. And no one heard the first shots in rain. The corridors buckled inward under pressure steam rising through ruptured pipe seams, wet catwalks clanging with loose bolts, the warehouse groaning like a ship caught in a turn. Shay moved faster now, dragging the hostage behind her through a lattice of stacked crates and leaning metal braces. Her NVGs were fogged past clarity. She yanked them off and dropped them to her chest, switching to naked vision. The red overhead lights painted everything in distorted outlines and flickers. Nothing looked still. Every puddle moved. Behind them, the silence broke with a snap of gunfire, too far off to see but close enough to echo off the steel bulkheads. Her partner had taken contact. No voice on the radio, just the short, mechanical punctuation of suppressed rounds being fired at close range. One burst, then another, then nothing. Shay didn't check the channel again. The headset crackled once, then died to static. The hostage's leg gave out halfway across the floor. He fell forward, landing hard, hands outstretched. Shay turned back instantly, yanked him to his feet with one arm, then dragged him toward a broken conveyor belt angled like a ramp against the wall. She pushed him behind it and flattened herself low against the floor. Across the open aisle, a pair of flashlight beams cut through the haze. The rebels weren't coordinated. They scanned unevenly, shouted over each other, boots splashing through standing water without formation. Shay rose just enough to take the shot. 2 short bursts. The suppressor barked once, then again. The first man dropped instantly. The second turned but never got his rifle shouldered. He fell awkwardly over a set of collapsed shelves, arms spread wide, his light clattering to the ground. Shay didn't move. Not yet. The hallway behind them remained quiet, but time was shifting. Everything pressed in tighter. She checked the hostage. He was conscious, breathing hard. His face was pale but steady. He nodded without being asked, then leaned into her grip as she guided him across the warehouse floor toward a side platform. The fallback exit was 3 turns ahead and 1 level up. That had been the plan. Reach the east catwalk, take the maintenance stairs, and exit through the service alcove. But Shay knew the plan was gone the moment the alarms turned red. The fallback path would be compromised. Teams would be responding from the outer towers now, drawn in by the one thing they could interpret without radio sound. She pivoted left instead, pulling the hostage toward a narrow maintenance corridor she'd mapped from satellite blueprints during prep. It wasn't ideal. It ran parallel to the old sub-bay and would eventually lead to the back of the roller dock, if it was unsealed. She didn't stop to debate it. She moved. The SMG felt heavier now, the sling biting into her shoulder with every shift of weight. The water underfoot was warm from machinery bleed and stank of oil. Steam coiled off it like smoke, bending light, hiding depth. The air was louder now, filled with distant shouting and hard footfalls. She led with her weapon, her shoulder pressed to the wall, clearing each segment of the hall before motioning the hostage forward. He obeyed, limping hard, breath ragged. Once he stumbled too far forward, and she grabbed the back of his collar and yanked him behind a support beam just as a rebel sprinted through a junction ahead, weapon high. He didn't see them. He kept running. They moved again. At the halfway point, Shay stepped wrong and her boot caught the edge of a fallen pallet. She slipped and slammed into a crate, knocking it sideways. The echo thundered through the corridor like a gunshot. Someone shouted from up ahead. No time. Two figures came around the bend, rifles ready. Shay didn't hesitate. She fired. 3 rounds into the first, then 2 more into the second. Clean, controlled, no spray, just aim and recoil. She knelt beside the hostage again, who had dropped flat to avoid the crossfire. His eyes were wide now, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. They kept moving. Slower now. Shay's breathing grew sharper at the edges, not panicked, just focused. Her mind broke the space into fragments, doorways, pipe stacks, shadows, cover angles. Nothing stayed whole. Everything was an equation of survival. Then the radio came back, just for a second. Her teammate's voice cracked through, distant and garbled. No good. Fallback is... They're waiting. I'm hit. Then silence. Shay paused beside a rusted service panel, one hand on the concrete to stay low. She stared at the floor. There was nothing left to reinforce. No rescue. No regrouping. The plan had officially collapsed. She turned to the hostage and nodded once. We're not going that way. He didn't ask. He followed. They reached the end of the corridor and found a service door chained but loose in the frame. Shay braced one foot against the bottom hinge and yanked. The chain snapped after 3 hard pulls, the metal screech swallowed by ambient rain pounding the roof above. Beyond it lay the roller dock, long since unused. The floor was flooded in places. The bay door at the far end hung crooked. Steam curled along the ground where hot pipes met rainwater. She stepped through first, weapon raised, scanning left, then right. No immediate targets, no lights, just the rhythmic flash of emergency strobes bouncing off puddles. She guided the hostage in and moved them low along the side wall, pressing through the shadows toward a secondary exit Shay hoped was still unlocked. Her breath was steady again. The chaos hadn't stopped. It had just bent around her. She didn't stop to check how far they had to go. She didn't stop to wonder who had made it. She had already accepted it. They weren't escaping. They were extracting, and Shay was going to finish it, 1 inch at a time. The roller dock stank of rust and old oil. Rainwater pooled around the uneven concrete floor, swirling around the shattered base of a forklift that hadn't moved in years. The dock door hung half-twisted off its track, leaving a gap wide enough to crawl through, but narrow enough to make any escape slow and exposed. Shay moved fast but low, pulling the hostage behind a broken support beam while scanning the far corners. The only light came from the emergency strobes blinking weakly against the inner wall, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. She activated her infrared strobe for the first time, letting it blink twice before killing it again. It was a gamble. If anyone from her team was still moving, that strobe would read as friendly. If no one was watching, it was just another wasted battery. She didn't wait to find out. The hostage stumbled again, falling forward onto his elbows. His breathing had turned ragged, shoulders trembling as he tried to speak but couldn't form the breath. Shay dropped beside him and pulled him back to his knees, slinging his arm over her shoulder and rising with one long, low push. Her left arm ached immediately. There was a sharp burn in her bicep, fresh blood soaking through the outer sleeve of her uniform. Somewhere along the corridor wall, a jagged pipe had split her skin. She hadn't felt it until now. She gritted her teeth and kept moving. The far wall of the dock held the emergency ramp sloped metal with torn grip tape, a runoff channel beside it nearly overflowing from the storm. That was the exit. It wasn't marked, but she had studied every satellite angle of this structure before boots hit the ground. The ramp led to a narrow access conduit that funneled water and waste runoff down into the old utility tunnels. That was where she had come from. That was where they were going back. Gunfire cracked from the far side of the building, uncontrolled, blind. Someone had seen movement and opened up too fast. Rounds struck the floor in tight bursts, bullets ricocheting off puddles and biting into the concrete near her boots. Shay dropped to one knee, spun behind a rusted generator shell, and sighted in. The muzzle of her SMG tracked a shadow just beyond a forklift cage. 2 short bursts, 1 target down. She couldn't confirm the second. She fired again. The strobe light flickered across the spray, then steadied. She exhaled and turned back to the hostage. He was on the ground again, hands braced, coughing hard. She leaned down and gripped his collar with both hands, dragging him to the edge of the ramp. Her arm throbbed from the cut. The SMG banged against her thigh as she moved. No time to sling it. No time for another plan. "You're going to crawl," she whispered, her voice low and even. "It's slick, but it'll hold." He didn't answer, just nodded and started moving. She stayed close, scanning every shadow, every angle of approach. Her mind was building the map faster than her eyes could confirm it. Every corridor, every pipe, every edge that could produce movement. She didn't think about pace. She didn't think about pain. She kept moving. The water rose around her boots. The ramp was already flooding from the pressure of the storm outside. The sides of her uniform clung to her body like weight. Her breath was hard now, shallow from the pressure on her ribs. But she didn't slow. She couldn't. At the halfway point up the ramp, the hostage collapsed again. His strength was gone. Shay reached him in 3 strides, slipped her arm under his chest, and pulled with everything left in her spine. He slid across the metal surface like dead weight, boots dragging behind him. Her wounded arm went numb at the elbow, but she didn't stop. More shouting behind her. A flashlight beam arced across the dock. She dropped beside the hostage and pulled him flat behind a concrete retaining wall just off the ramp. The light passed over them, then turned away. Her lips were dry. Her gloves were soaked. The SMG had maybe a dozen rounds left. She pushed the magazine release, checked it in her palm, and reinserted it with a snap. "You keep crawling. I'll follow." He nodded. It was all he could do. She stood first, SMG raised, scanning the far wall. One more burst of blind fire struck the generator casing where they had just been. She ducked, waited, then pushed the hostage forward with one hand and followed at a crouch. The ramp ended in a sloped steel grate that fed into a runoff tunnel. The grate had been loosened by years of flooding. Shay reached down, braced her boot against the edge, and pulled. It came free with a groan. She shoved the hostage into the opening, feet first. He slid into the darkness without a sound, boots scraping the inner pipe as he vanished from view. Shay turned one last time. She scanned the compound behind her. No figures, no lights approaching, no voices she recognized. No one left. She dropped into the tunnel after him, boots finding the cold curve of the pipe as water rushed around her ankles. The walls were close, the ceiling barely shoulder width. But it was safe. It was the way out. And she hadn't waited for clearance. She hadn't needed it. The yard was wide open. No scaffolding, no low walls. Just a sheet of rain sliding across broken pavement and standing water. Shay moved fast but crouched, one hand gripping the hostage's jacket collar, the other still holding her suppressed submachine gun. Water splashed around their boots, shallow at first, then ankle deep near the center. Fog rose from the drain vents scattered across the lot, creating streaks of motion that blurred lines and twisted shadows into false targets. She toggled the infrared strobe again. One blink, then 2. Still no answer. No signal in return. No glint of recognition from rooftops or doorways. Just the steady pulse of wind pushing steam across her path. The compound behind them was distant now, only partially visible through the shifting white mist. They had made it out of the structure, but they were still in range. The metal platform on the far side groaned. Shay froze, pulling the hostage down into a crouch. High above them, a figure leaned over the railing, his silhouette cut through the fog in jagged fragments, weapon raised. Shay exhaled, lined up the shot, and fired once, then again. The The suppressed bark cracked the silence. The man dropped. His rifle clattered beside him, skidding along the platform before falling into the water. No time to confirm. Another shape moved across the yard closer, ground level, flashlight bobbing. He fired blind. Rounds zipped across the water, striking puddles with sharp cracks. Shay ducked low, pulling the hostage to the left. Her shoulder slammed into the edge of a rusted metal bin. Her weapon jammed mid-step, the bolt sticking with a wet clunk. She hissed under her breath and dropped behind cover. The SMG was slick with condensation. She cleared the chamber with one hard jerk, slapping the bolt forward with her palm. The rifle clicked back into place. She didn't curse. She didn't pause. She rose again and moved, hauling the hostage with her. The man beside her stumbled through the next set of steps. His eyes were unfocused now. Each breath wheezed. His boots dragged. Shay steadied him with her hand against his lower back. "We're almost there," she said, voice low and deliberate. "1 more 100 feet. You're not stopping now." He didn't respond, but he kept moving. The fog thinned near the edge of the drainage channel. Shay saw the concrete lip of the tunnel entrance, the same route they had used to enter, now twisted with runoff water and rain-slick metal. A faint glint of light reflected off the rivets. That was the exit. Nothing else was left. Then came the flare. Behind them, near the far corner of the yard, a red bloom lit the fog. It rose fast and burned low, a crack of light that painted the steam in bloody waves. Shay didn't stop. She didn't look back. She dropped her shoulder again and pulled the hostage toward the final incline. They reached the drain. The tunnel was smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she was just heavier now, soaked, bleeding, carrying too much. The hostage dropped to his knees, unable to crawl forward. Shay helped him, lowered him into position, then shoved him feet first into the pipe. That was when she saw the shape. A man stood at the mouth of the tunnel, partially concealed in the mist, rifle steady. She brought her weapon up, squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty. The man raised his rifle. Before he could fire, he folded forward. One clean shot echoed through the fog, suppressed, tight, exact. Shay didn't flinch. She turned her head slightly. Far behind her, near the edge of the structure, a shadow moved. One figure, weapon shouldered, watching. One teammate had made it. Shay nodded once. Not a thank you, not a request, just the acknowledgement of presence, of timing. Then she turned and slid into the tunnel without another sound. The rain didn't stop all at once. It faded like breath after a sprint, the way thunder rolls out until you forget when it last cracked. Shay sat beneath a rusted canopy near the drainage channel. Soaked gear slumped beside her, boots half submerged in pooled water that hadn't drained yet. The runoff still trickled past her ankles, but the downpour had faded into a mist that barely touched the skin. Wind moved gently across the broken concrete, brushing aside scraps of tarp and wet paper. The hostage lay a few feet away on a makeshift stretcher. An IV bag hung from a length of rebar that stuck up from the ground like a snapped antenna. He wasn't speaking. He didn't need to. Color had returned to his face. His breathing had evened out. One of the younger SEALs knelt beside him, checking vitals with practiced hands, saying nothing. There were only 4 of them left. The others hadn't made it. Shay didn't ask for names. She had removed her plate carrier and set it against the wall. Her uniform clung to her in patches, soaked through and streaked with dirt and grease. Her left arm was bandaged in silence. She hadn't said when she was injured, and no one had asked. The team moved differently around her now, not in fear, but with the quiet awareness that something had passed between her and the mission that didn't need translation. One of the younger men looked up from the hostage and studied her. "You dragged him out?" he asked. Shay didn't answer. She tightened the strap on her boot and kept her eyes on the far tree line. He shifted slightly. "By yourself?" She stood, stretched her shoulders, then crouched again to inspect her weapon. Not because she needed to, but because it gave her something to do with her hands. She hadn't reloaded. She didn't plan to. The team leader stepped toward her. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her long enough that the pause filled the space where words usually lived. When he did speak, it was quiet, almost beneath the sound of wind moving through the drainage grate. "You were last eyes." Shay looked up, still saw. He nodded once. Nothing else passed between them. No salute, no nod of approval, just recognition that she had seen what no one else did, and moved anyway. Another seal sat nearby, arms across his knees, staring at the metal yard gate in the distance. "I thought that place was going to fold in on itself," he muttered. "We were buried in there. I didn't think anyone was coming out." Shay didn't respond. She unzipped a pouch from her kit and pulled out a spare tourniquet. She didn't need it. She held it anyway. Her thumb moved slowly across the textured fabric, pressing into the buckle, then letting go. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Nothing had moved there for several minutes. In the distance, the low thump of rotor blades began to grow. The extraction bird was finally inbound, too late to matter, just in time to clean up. The wind shifted again, stirring debris across the lot. The red light from the flare had long since burned out, but its scent still clung to the air, wet cordite and rust. Shay finally sat back, spine against a support beam, legs stretched just far enough to ease the ache in her knees. Her fingers still trembled occasionally. Not from adrenaline, from release. The kind that comes when you don't have to measure each breath for someone else anymore. Rain pattered lightly on the canopy above, soft and rhythmic. Somewhere far behind them, a bird called once, then silence. One of the surviving seals walked over, younger than the rest. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, his face pale beneath the grime. "Next time," he said, almost cautiously, "leave the hostage to the team." Shay looked at him. There was no heat in her expression, just a steady gaze and a voice so calm it barely carried. "Next time," she said, "bring a team." And when the rain finally stopped, Shay was already gone.